What operates today is very different to what it was years ago. And that varies right across the country. Varies right across the country. So where people are still speaking their traditional languages, living to a degree to their traditional law, that kinship structure is still in place to the degree that about 50% of people are still marrying according to that structure. 50% are marrying because of a love. They fall in love with somebody. So they've followed the Hollywood version of how you should live. And interestingly enough, it's the people who have followed the Western way who end up with troubles, a lot of troubles in their marriage. A lot of troubles, because the same social structure is not there to support both the wife and the husband. Now, it's very difficult for this traditional system to stay in place when the mainstream community now, people who have come to Australia and their descendants, have no understanding whatsoever of this traditional kinship structure. Worse than that, many of them come to communities and they poo-hoo it, or they see it as wrong or backward or primitive or whatever, and they have no understanding what it's about. No understanding what it's about. And this can be, whether it's feminists or missionaries pushing their own agenda, coming along and pushing their particular agenda into a community, and then talking against traditional structures that have been in place for 40, 100,000 years or what. So it's breaking down fairly fast, and as people become more and more, as they move further and further away from their traditional roots, they become more and more dysfunctional as a social body. And like in traditional society, you find that abuse of children is a no-no, absolute no-no. That's why Aboriginal people said little children are sacred. That didn't come from whitefellas or John Howard or anyone else like that. That came from Aboriginal people. They said, how can you abuse young people, or how can you abuse children? Because they're sacred. They have a sacred right. And our responsibility of adults is to look after that sacred right. When abuse of children first started to be spoken of here in Arnhem Land, people were ringing me and asking, what do they mean? When the intervention occurred, people were ringing me up and saying, can you send some clothes out for our kids? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, our kids haven't got a lot of clothes. They usually run around with no clothing on. We're in the tropics, and you know, it's like my kids when they were growing up on community, they ran around naked all day. But now that's a no-no. And people were thinking, oh, it's because our kids are running around naked. That's what they're upset about. That's what they thought pornography was. They didn't understand any of those subjects about pornography and child abuse and all. That was mainstream Australia imposing, projecting in on these communities. Now, some Aboriginal communities across Australia, lots of them actual fact, do have problems with incest and abuse of children now. But that is not Aboriginal culture. It's not the original Australian culture. It's what they have learnt from naive, dare I say, stupid mainstream people who have come and spoken against, pushed their barra to get their barra in a particular place, and been part of the destruction of the traditional structure. Widyar Marika, who's one of the sole standing survivors of the Yorta Yindi band, when we were doing seminars all over the country, used to say, Australia should learn this kinship system. They should learn the system because it's a care of people. It's how we look after each other. But unfortunately, it's breaking down very fast, and young people today don't want to follow that way. They're talking against it. They're saying, we want to be like Ballender. When they say we want to be like Ballender, we want to be like the people we see on the movies, on the stupid movies, on the worst of worst movies. We want freedom like that. And we're told we live in a free country and we should be able to do that. We should be able to go and get any girl we want when we want it. So the interface of these collisions of two cultures means that the worst comes out of it. And some Aboriginal families across Australia, they would say most of our women have been assaulted or molested by our own relatives. That was not Aboriginal culture. It might be contemporary culture for some people today, but it was not the traditional culture. That is the result of the ignorance and the stupidity of mainstream people coming in, looking at a very complex system and passing judgment on it. Naively, stupidly passing judgment on it, rather than spending the years that are needed to understand what that system's about first. Understand what it's about first. Because if you believe in the great creative spirit, which I do, don't have any troubles with that. If the great creative spirit put this system in place and you come and destroy the very handiwork of the creator, be very careful. The further the people move away from their traditional society, the more social problems we're going to see. It would be better if the mainstream was learning what these systems are about and we're moving more towards the original Australian culture, which has served the people well for 40 to 100,000 years. That's why they're the oldest surviving culture on earth, because it served them well. It wasn't primitive, it wasn't pagan, it wasn't backward. It was fantastic. And it looked after everybody that was in need, old or young.